I'm Dave Lynch with Aqua Solutions. We're the local rep for JWC in New England. And just want to go over the sludge grinder here today. It's an inline grinder. The model designation is a 3004 T-1208. And the 3004 model is the pipeline model. The 3005 model is the channel model. It sits right in an open channel. And the 12 designation is the size of the cutters. It's 12-inch cutter stacks. And the 08 is the pipe diameter. So that's the designation on it. And what you have is, you have the body of the grinder that the cutter stack sits in. You have two cutter stacks in here. At the top of the unit, there's two gears that drive those shafts and cutters, okay, connected by a coupling, Lovejoy coupling here, to a speed reducer that reduces the speed of the motor down to about 60 RPM at the input side on the cutter stack. So the flow of the sludge is indicated by an arrow on the body, the main body of the grinder. And the cutter's rotation is such that with the flow coming in, the cutters rotate towards the center and go with the flow from the outside in. So it's pulling everything into the center of the cutters. The cutters are alternated from one side to the other, so one cutter fits between two cutters, and it's actually shearing any material that comes through there. As far as maintenance, I like to say it's low maintenance, not no maintenance. There's really very little to do with the unit. The speed reducer is all self-contained, grease lubricated. Same thing with the gears in the upper part of the housing here. Grease lubricated. The maintenance interval on that grease is every 5 years. They recommend changing it. Also in the top of the unit and the bottom of the unit, there's the bearings and mechanical seal cartridges. They're all one unit, the bearings and the mechanical seals. So you have one on each shaft at the top and one on each shaft at the bottom. And you can pass this around, you can get an idea of what they look like in the cutter stacks. This is the model right here. And there's the mechanical seal and bearings, Cartridge. As far as maintenance on the unit itself, you really just want to be listening for any abnormal noises, any rattling, clanging noises. When the machine is running normally, it'll be smooth, it'll be relatively quiet. They recommend after the initial 30 days of operation that you check the tightness of those cutter stacks. The clearances between the cutters and the spacers is relatively small. It's like 0.004 of an inch. So those cutters are really tight. There shouldn't be any deflection along the shafts of those cutters. So these inspection ports here you can open and you can actually look in and see the cutter stacks. And if you get a pry bar or a long screwdriver and put it between the cutters and try to move them axially along the shaft, you should have little movement there or none. If you start getting a lot of deflection, you need to tighten up the cutter stacks, which could be done through this inspection plate here. You just remove these 4 bolts and you'll see the nuts on the tops of the shafts. And it's just a matter of holding them with a wrench and tightening them. They recommend tightening the bolts to 130 foot-pounds. And all of this information is in the operation and maintenance manual. If you ever need to do maintenance and remove the cutter cartridge, it's relatively simple. I know you guys use the exchange program where JWC will send you a replacement cutter cartridge. Basically, when the thing shows up, you unbolt your motor and speed reducer from the top of the unit here with these 4 bolts, pull that off, pull this cutter cartridge out, put the new cutter cartridge in, and bolt your motor back up to it. That seems to be the way everybody's going these days. Nobody's really rebuilding these things at the facilities, and it's a pretty good deal. They get it out to you relatively quick. But the procedure for removing that, again, is you take these 4 bolts off here at the spool piece, remove your motor and speed reducer. Then the series of bolts here on this major flange here, you take those off. And then also the 6 bolts underneath here on the bottom is just a gasketed joint here. You have to remove those, and then you can pull this whole cutter cartridge out. In that pamphlet that I was passing around, it shows that pulled out, so you can get an idea of what that looks like. Other than that, it's a 5 horsepower motor. You got 2 Lovejoy couplings, one here between the motor and the speed reducer, and then you have another one here down below to the actual cutter stack, the drive for the cutter stack. This is the control panel for the grinder. Explosion-proof unit with about 10 million bolts in it. You have your power on indication, your run indication, and then this is your fail indication. This bulb here will flash at different rates to depict what type of failure you might have, and those probable causes are listed on the electrical drawing. Depending on how that's flashing, it'll tell you what the problem is. Your start button, your stop and reset button. This is a phase monitor trip. This is just sensing the incoming current, so it'll give the right rotation of the unit. If you ever have to change a motor out though, don't just rely on this. This will probably won't allow you to start it. You won't get a green light on the phase monitor, so you'd have to change 2 legs on your motor just to get it to run. Or change the rotation.
This panel have the AB maintenance on it like the old ones.
The what now?
AB maintenance lights.
No, it doesn't have that, no. And then you have your local off remote switch. So depending on how you're running the unit, through SCADA would be on remote, and then locally here, and hand would be local, just to run it locally here. Inside the panel itself, again, this is just your phase monitor monitoring the incoming current. Line voltage coming in to step-down transformer for the control circuitry here. You have a forward and reversing contactor, the current transformer, and the PLC, which is the brains of the unit. Under normal operation, if you get a jam, those cutters are rotating towards the center and you get something jammed in there. The current sensor will sense that spike in current and send a signal to the PLC. So it's running in forward now. What it does is it senses that high current and it wants to reverse it to try to clear it. So it sends a signal and it's just switching 2 of the legs from one contactor to the other and having it go in reverse. It just goes in reverse for about 1/4 of a turn, and then it'll come forward again. The PLC tells it to go back to the other contactor and come forward. So if it passes it, it just continues to run. If it still jams, it will reverse 3 times and try to pass that object. On the 3rd try, if it doesn't pass it, it's gonna trip and it's gonna tell you have a jam indication out here. This light will be flashing such that if you read the electrical drawing, it'll tell you that you have a jam. When that happens, you just have to shut the unit off, reset it, and then start it. And then down here is just your terminal strip with your wiring going out to the motor, any wires going to SCADA for control, and that's about it. Your motor overload here, reset. Full load amperage on the motor is 7 amps, so I already checked that, that's set correctly. And then you have your fuses up top here.
They If you have half a day, just open that up.
Well, you better have your battery-operated drill, right? But you can't, I can simulate a jam from the panel here. So this is just saying we have power here. It's not seeing any alarms or anything. So you'd have the unit in local, and you just hit start to start it. So the unit's running now. And I've already verified that rotation is correct, so the cutters are moving towards the center. So if I go off, remote on, remote on, remote on. That's electronically, that's simulating a jam. That was the contactors, and then you get your fail alarm there. So you just have to reset that, and then you're back in business. So that's pretty much it. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Again, there's not a lot of maintenance with it, but you know, it needs to be looked at every once in a while just to check the tightness of the cutter stack. And that's pretty much it.